So here we are to study the book of Job. So before we jump into some texts which are not the book of Job yet, that will get us ready for it, I want to ask you all, what's the book of Job about? And well, why do you want? I mean, I know Matt was the one who really said you wanted to study it, but then other people said, yeah. So what do you think the book of Job is about? What have you heard about it from, I don't know, Sunday school, from culture, from whatever?
It's not about getting a job.
It's not about- right. So like, I don't know, like, yeah, so J-O-B in English. So the guy's name is Eov, right? We'll look at that soon. Okay. And they got anglicized as J-O-B, Job. Okay. But it's not about getting a job. No, it might be about losing a job, but it's not about getting a job. Yeah.
Challenges God.
So Job challenges God. Interesting. Good. Okay. Perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. But
It's about inexplicable suffering that is inexplicable to human beings.
suffering that's inexplicable to human beings, right? But maybe we know why he's suffering too, but maybe we don't. But suffering, yes, is very important. Yeah, Ken.
What is really knowable?
What is knowable? Okay, good. So it's right. I don't know if I'm using this right, but epistemology is the study of how you know what you know. Yeah. Okay, good.
I think it's also survival of how you overcome adversity.
Overcoming adversity. Okay, good. Good. What else?
Resilience.
Resilience, perhaps.
Keeping the faith.
Keeping faith, perhaps. We'll definitely discuss what is faith, and yeah, and what does God want from us when it comes to faith, right? Okay,
At
good.
least to believe that maybe something good will,
Yeah.
like, it will not be forever that.
Maybe.
That spot.
Yeah, maybe. What else?
Well, Job was a paragon of virtue.
Paragon of virtue. Okay,
And-
maybe he was.
And the question is, if you're a paragon of virtue, are you immune to the
Mm,
very severe trials and tribulations that we as human beings can suffer?
yeah, suffering. Right? Nobody said suffering yet. I mean, we kind of skirted around it, but suffering.
Rabbi,
definitely-
suffering could be found in every aspect of Jewish world.
Suffering can be found.
I'm suffering.
Yeah, right, but okay, why? Who causes suffering?
Everybody.
Okay, does God cause suffering?
Well, that's the question.
Uh-huh.
If you don't do as you're supposed to suffer.
Is that right? Is that the question that Job is going to ask? We'll see. We'll look at Deuteronomy in a second, and that's what it seems to say there. But is that what Job says? I don't know. We'll see that. Okay.
Seems to me that if God created everything and suffering exists.
Yeah.
Suffering must be part of what God created, no?
Suffering, yeah, is suffering part of what God created, but is God directly inflicting the suffering is also the question. Okay.
What does it mean to actually be a friend?
What does it mean to act? Good, I'm glad you said that. This is a good guide to Shiva, too. We will meet Job's friends who are not good Shiva attendants. You'll see why when we get there. Okay. Good. What does it mean to be a friend? Does Job have any good friends, or just pious friends, right? Overly pious friends. Good. All right. Any other things?
I'll throw one in.
Yeah.
Our need for order in a world of chaos.
Our need for order in a world of chaos. Yes. Very nice. Very nice.
That's a universal.
This is a universal book, and we'll see. So let me talk a little bit about Job. Actually, turn to we're going to skip around the Bible a bit. Turn to Ezekiel chapter 14.
I don't know.
So Ezekiel is one of the prophets, one of the longer books of the prophets. So
11:55.
okay, so what did you say? 11:55?
That's where it starts.
Okay.
So we're in chapter what?
Ezekiel, so Yechezkel chapter 14, and you said 11:55. Oh, that's where the book starts.
Yeah.
Okay.
Chapter 14, it seems to be 1178. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just doing this because just this one verse from Ezekiel universalizes the story a little bit, because it says, the Noach, Daniel, the Eov. Should Noah, Daniel, and Job be in it as I live, declares sovereign God. Doesn't matter what the verse is about, but he mentions these three people. Who's the first one? Noach. You see where I am?
No.
Oh, you're not there yet.
Verse 14.
Sorry, chapter 14, verse 20. Chapter 14, verse 20.
Well, that's-
Sorry. I gotta get back in the routine.
1179.
Well, it's both verse 14 and 20.
Yeah, chapter 14, verse 20.
1179.
Okay, you guys have to look. Remember, we gotta get fast at this of navigating Bible, right?
20 would be
You-
helpful, that's a.
Yeah. Verse 20, okay. So, V'Noach, Daniel, V'Eov. The prophet Ezekiel living in exile in Babylonia mentions these three people. Noah, who's Noah?
No.
No, the flood. Daniel, well, so it might be the book of Daniel, but it's a lot of scholars say that there was some kind of Babylonian guy named Daniel also, maybe some story out there about this guy named Daniel, and Eov is our Job, right? Eov is not an Israelite. He's someone that everybody in the Middle East knew about, perhaps. Okay? All right, you with me? So Eov, in our tradition, in our Bible, set up as a universal story. Does not mention Israel. It does not mention Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. It does not, it has many names for God, but never says, the God of Israel. Okay.
So it was written before Ezekiel.
And was the book written before Ezekiel? Not known. People argue about when the book was written. This person named Job, or this stories about a guy named Job before the book of Ezekiel.
Okay.
Okay, does that make sense? Yeah.
Does Job have any identifiable religious beliefs if he's not an Israelite?
He is a monotheist. He believes in one God, but like he doesn't necessarily live the way the Israelites live, right?
Isn't there a story about, which I read, isn't there a story about his wife, when it gets a bit apart, actually being the daughter of Jacob?
Yeah, so the rabbis say his daughter or his wife is Dinah, Jacob's daughter, right? Who was in the book of Genesis, was raped by Shechem, right? So but no, it doesn't say that.
It's just a folk story.
Yeah, right. So yeah, so there's a lot of we'll talk about the rabbis in a second about Job, but let's so Job is a book in the Ketuvim, the third section of Tanakh, right? We've talked about Tanakh. Sorry, my notification there. We've talked about Tanakh, Torah. It's an acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, the prophet, right? We've read a lot from the book from Nevi'im, and Ketuvim, the writings, right? Which includes the book of Psalms, book of Proverbs, and then comes the book of Job, Ecclesiastes, Esther, Lamentations. That's all in the writings, the third section, right? Okay. Job is not generally done liturgically, or is not a liturgical book that you ever read. There are some verses or paraphrases in prayers, but it's not a book. It's not a book that most Jews in the pews would know because it's not read at any holiday, right? Our ancient rabbis argue, was it a historical book? When did it take place? Is it just a folk tale? Is it, was Job an Israelite? Was he not an Israelite? Okay. He might have lived at the time of Abraham, they say, but doesn't matter. The language in Job, the person, maybe there's two different parts of Job. There's the beginning chapters, which are a tale. The tale we know, or we might have heard of, that this being, Hasatan, wagers with God, that Job will curse him if we take away all his riches, and then if we afflict him with pain. And then the folktale ends at the end of the book that God gives Job back all his stuff, gives him new kids, right? God kills his kids and then gives him back new kids, right? The middle of the book, like 38 chapters or something like that, are poems that stand alone about a lot of these things we talked about, the nature of suffering, does God cause it? What does it mean to be do righteous people, can righteous people suffer, being a good friend, all these things. So it's like the person who put together this book of Job took this maybe pre-existing folk story about a righteous person who lost everything and then regained everything because he was righteous, and then put in actual philosophical discussions in between, right? Because you read the folk story, it's a different Job. Job the patient, right? You might have heard that phrase. Have you heard that phrase? It comes from the New Testament. I forgot what book, but from the King James, translation of the New Testament. Job of the folktale might be patient. Job of the poems is not patient, right? Job of the poems is defiant. Okay. So we have our stereotypical Job of Western culture of the guy that just takes stuff, right, and is righteous and didn't deserve it, and right. But the actual Job of the most of the book is not that. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
was Job a real man?
Was he a real person?
Yeah.
We have no way of knowing, and even the rabbis 2,000 years ago argued about that, right? But he is meant to be an architect, right? He's meant to be a person, right? A person who is righteous, and we'll see that, right?
Yeah.
And he comes from a place called Uts, which is on the east side of the Jordan, right? So again, not an Israelite, but on purpose in the book, right?
You make potato chips, right?
And also the person who wrote the person or the people who wrote the poems mix in Aramaicisms, maybe to make it seem like it's not from Israel, or people would argue that Aramaic was starting to creep into Hebrew at the time. So that some people would say, oh, it's a later book because Aramaic creeping into Hebrew, or some people would say, no, the writer did it that way to make it seem exotic, right? Okay. Questions, comments?
Wasn't, was it the tribe of Benjamin that was on the east side of the?
No. Benjamin lived like around Jerusalem.
Okay, who was over there?
Menashe and it doesn't matter, they were farther north.
Okay, so it wouldn't be like a holdover.
No.
Okay.
So it's just the east side of the Jordan, I heard that.
The southern, it might have been in Edom, I think, yeah.
But not Arabia, because I've heard things.
Oh, so it could be
That
even
might be,
farther east.
yeah.
And one of his friends
Yeah.
comes from a place called Kedem, which means east. So it might be as far as Arabia.
Who knows?
I think scholars have found names similar to Yov in ancient Arabic
Right.
and things like that too. So, yes. Other questions? Okay. So let's look, before again we get to Job, let's look at the book of Deuteronomy. Because if we're talking about punishment, it's a good place to start. How does the book of Deuteronomy say that punishment is supposed to happen? What do we think? What,
If you do something wrong.
Yeah.
That's why you're punished.
right. But is it you singular or y'all? No,
Very
that's
often y'all.
y'all, right?
All of y'all.
All y'all, right? So the Hebrew, so Hebrew has a, singular you and a plural you, ata and atem. English used to, but it dropped out in English, except in the South where we say you and y'all, right? It's very helpful to have y'all, right?
Doesn't necessarily
And
mean
any-
that though in the South.
Not all the time. All y'all does. All y'all
yeah.
is the plural you. Yeah. It depends where you are in the South.
Yeah.
Definitely in Louisiana, they say all y'all. Right, okay? I guess in Philadelphia, they say use.
Yeah.
So it's plural too, right?
That's what we do.
Yeah, and so,
Pittsburgh, they say yins.
yins, right.
There's a history of that. Your wiki,
Right, because it all comes from, it comes from other languages that had
Right.
plural use,
they
right?
blended it in.
But English did. If you read Shakespeare, English also had a familiar you and That's a formal
Oh,
ye,
yeah,
right?
thou
So
was a
ye
phrase.
was formal and thou was,
Right.
or maybe ye was plural and
That's
you,
right.
right, something like that.
People think that was so.
No, thou
Oh,
sounds
it
horrible, but
was
thou
like
is
the-
the familiar.
there's
That's
a
why
familiar.
when they translated like the Union Prayer Book, blessed are thou, God, right?
Familiar.
It's God is familiar to you. right?
But it sounds not
Yeah,
familiar.
yeah.
It's
I
like-
think the Quakers kept that up.
Yeah, the Quakers kept it up on purpose. Even though American English dropped it, the Quakers kept it because they're called the Friends, everybody was a friend to them. That's why they said
They
that.
kept up that language.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you said thou, into the 19th century, they were saying thou, I think. Okay, so let's look at the Ten Commandments. You could look at it in Exodus too, but we'll just look at it in Deuteronomy to stay. So turn to Deuteronomy chapter 5. Verse 6 is where the Ten Commandments are in Deuteronomy, okay? Because I want to look at a statement about punishment there, and then we'll go to another famous statement about punishment. Okay?
386.
Or 381.
386. Okay, so someone start us off there, verses. They'll be familiar to you, of course, hopefully.
It's out of West Wing.
Yeah.
I am the Lord your God, I, the Lord am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage, and you shall have no other gods beside me. You shall not make for yourself a sculptured image, any likeness of what is in the heavens above, or on the earth below, or in the waters below the earth. You shall not bow down to them or serve them, for I am the Lord your God. For I, the Lord your God, am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt of the parents upon the children, upon the third and upon the fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1000th generation for those who love me and keep my commandments.
Stop. Okay. All right, so tell me here in the just in the Ten Commandments, tell me about punishment. Well, what's the main sin here?
Idolatry.
Idolatry, right? But tell me about punishment.
Was for generations.
Okay, it might go for, but first of all, okay, tell me about reward.
Reward goes on forever.
Reward goes on forever. Punishment's only 3 generations, maybe, right? So it's meant to be God is endlessly loving, right? It like we stick up, we the punishment part really bothers us because we're narcissistic. No, I'm kidding. But the reward part is so much bigger, right? 1,000 to 3 is, I don't know what that fraction is, like it's very small, right? But why do you get punished
For idolatry.
for idolatry? And then also we have to think about generations. 3 generations lived in the same house,
Right. So,
Right?
Yeah.
and so
it's your household.
it's the household is punished,
Yeah.
right? It says here, right?
So you can be punished for the sins of your father or your
Grandfather.
generations and not know anything about it.
Right, but you would know about it because it's only 3 generations,
Okay.
right?
Live in the house.
You live in the house, and this is in the you singular, right? This is in the you singular, this idolatry stuff, right? Okay,
Is there a contradiction in this promise here? Because 1,000 generations, what if the 101st generation is bad?
Yeah.
What happens, even if the first
Right.
generation was good,
Right.
do you get the benefit?
right,
Or you
and
get
that
the punishment?
and that's why I think it's a hyperbolic statement and not a mathematical statement. Right,
I take it as being as long as. not-
yeah.
But does it have
Not-
to be mutually exclusive? I mean, with our children,
Yeah.
you could be angry with them and punish them for the things they did, but doesn't mean you don't love them and still.
Right, yeah, love and punishment are mixed together, and God is endlessly patient. Well, we will turn back to Deuteronomy, let's turn back to Deuteronomy in a sec, or to Exodus in a second and look at that. Because, but it seems like we're setting up here, you do wrong and you get punished, right? Okay? That's what it seems like. Any other comments?
Well, that's changed.
Okay, but like, I mean, okay, we don't see God coming out of the sky and doing that, right? We'll discuss that as we go along.
No, I meant you do wrong, you get punished. That's in modern times. That's inequality.
True. But at the same time, I got pulled over the other day by going through a yellow light while it was turning red, right? And so like,
Yeah.
you know, it does happen. I got out, I didn't get a ticket because, you know, I'm a nice guy, you know.
You're a nice white guy.
That's what I meant, but you know, in Morris Plains, right, so like, but, you know, we still set up a system where there's supposed to be consequences, right? Okay, but. Right now, idolatry, personal to you. The people around you are affected by your sin, right? Ezekiel complicates that a little bit later. I don't know if we'll look at that, that you're not liable for the sins of your parents. But remember, the book we studied last year, the Book of Kings, and the Book of Kings ended in exile because of what generations of kings have done, right? And that affects a whole people. So it is true in some way that your individual sin does affect other people, right? We Americans like to think only, you know, what I do affects me and it's not bothering you, but it does. Right? I mean, there's you know, shades of gray.
I mean, if you're an abusive, terrible parent, your children are gonna suffer.
Your children are going to suffer, and often
The
that
society around you might suffer too.
that is definitely true. And also, and we all pick up the bad habits of our parents too. You know, so you can break the cycle. Yeah.
Also, if you commit a crime and are prosecuted and go to jail,
Mhm.
then your family, certainly suffers.
In America, that happens definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then in America, here, I'll go rant a little bit. When you get out of jail, then you're not allowed to have a job and your family continues
Yeah.
to suffer.
Yeah.
Right?
But it's bigger than, I think it's bigger than that. We're all, it's just that we're all interconnected. So there's
Yeah.
the people who sit on the jury.
Yeah.
There's the news, and
Yeah.
then it undermines people's trust in society.
Yep.
I mean, it ripples out
Yep.
beyond our individual
Yep.
selves, family, whatever.
100%.
100%.
Yep. Yep.
But you're losing sight of the individual's right as the rugged individualist to
Right.
carry arms concealed.
Right. But like, yeah, but we're all tied together. Yeah.
Mhm.
That is a very big notion in the Bible, and sin affects the society. And so much so, like in the Book of Deuteronomy or the Book of Leviticus often says, like, the land will spew you out, right? Spew all of you out for sin, right? Okay, everything's conditional. Right? The promises of God in the land are conditional on how you act, right? Okay, so let's look. But turn to Deuteronomy 13. I think 13. No, sorry, Deuteronomy 11, verse 13.
Page 400.
This is a famous passage from the Torah because this is what's called traditionally the second paragraph of the Shema.
We don't say in Reform.
We don't generally say in Reform, right? But for about 100 and let's say 130 or so years, Reform prayer books have not had this paragraph in it. Mishkan Tefillah puts it back as a interpretation in English, only in the mornings. Okay. Yeah. So this is in the plural. Okay. The y'alls, all y'alls, right? All y'all. All right. So and read. It says Hayat im Shemoah Tishma'u. Someone go ahead.
If then you obey the commandments that I enjoined upon you this day, loving the Lord your God and serving him with all your heart and soul.
Right. Remember, you all, not you.
I will grant the rain for your land in season, and the early rain and the late. You shall gather in your new grain and wine and oil. I will also provide grass in the fields for your cattle, and thus you shall eat your fill. Take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them, for the Lord's anger will flare up against you, and he will shut up the skies so that there will be no rain, and the ground will not yield its produce, and you will soon perish from the good land that the Lord is assigning to you.
Keep going.
Therefore, impress these my words upon your very heart. Bind them as a sign on your hand and let them serve as a symbol on your forehead.
What's that?
Filling.
Filling, right?
Or mezuzah.
Well, we'll get to this in
Oh,
a
I thought it
second.
said.
We'll get
that's
there.
next, yeah. And then teach them unto your children, recite them when you stay at home and when you are away, when you lie down, and when you rise up, and inscribe them on your doorposts of your house and on your gates, to the end that you and your children may endure in the land that the Lord swore to your fathers to assign to them, as long as there is heaven over the earth.
All right, good. As long as there's heaven over the earth means as long as the universe lasts. Right, heaven means the sky, right? Okay, so what do we learn? What is punishment about?
Not observing commandments.
Not observing, it seems like all the commandments, living in a specific way in the land, good, okay. Again, it's plural to you all. What's the main reward?
Good weather.
Good.
Yeah,
Or bad weather?
bad weather, yeah,
Yeah.
it's presupposed things, it's very transactional that, avoiding bad weather is dependent on
Yeah.
observing the commandments.
Yeah.
And it's also very, God sort of acting in the physical.
The cycles of nature, yeah.
The cycles
Yeah.
of nature.
Yeah, right. So now we have to think about, hold on one second, we have to think, and we talked about this a lot. The land of Israel is not Egypt or Babylonia. Egypt and Babylonia, how did their agriculture survive? They had huge rivers that flood every year and they build canals to take the water to the fields. How does Israel get its water?
Rain.
A little bit of rain. That's it. A little bit of rain and snow on Mount Hermon, which is in the Golan. When that melts, it goes into the Jordan. The Jordan is not a big river. I grew up on the Mississippi, where the Mississippi and the Missouri come together. Those are rivers. The Jordan is not a big river, so there's no canals that they built. And then rain. It only rains in the land of Israel from October to April, right? And it doesn't rain a lot. And when it didn't rain a lot, what happened?
Nothing grows.
Nothing grows. That's why the Torah all the time talks about, the seventh year you store up and you allow the poor people, and that's why so much of the Torah is about, when you lose your land and have to take loans from other people, right? If the weather's not good, you lose your land, right? You have to sell, you have to do whatever, right? And so this is, it's a different view of faith, right, than the Egyptians, and that's why the king of Egypt ruled the Nile, right? Yeah.
That's why the Fertile Crescent.
Yeah.
Skims around Israel.
Exactly. But the land of Israel was good soil for certain things. Grapes come from the land of Israel and spread around, and olive, right? And so
But this seems almost sort of like, I don't know what the right word is, but it's like rain. It would be hard to map a correlation, I suspect, in one or two between however good the Israeli population was at a particular time and the weather, right? Like you would like there wouldn't be that kind of correlation or causation. It's a very
the high priest could tell you that this is.
but it's a very juvenile way of sort of thinking about how the world operates.
for sure, and that's why you blamed your ancestor. Right? I'm kidding, but in the book of back to the Book of Kings, which we did, why were they exiled? The sin of our ancestors, right? The sin kind of builds up until God loses patience, right? So if it's not raining, it might not be you and your generation; it might be previous generations, but if you and your generation are righteous, why should you suffer? And then the book of Deuteronomy doesn't answer that. And so is this written to be hyperbolic just to scare you? Or do they think this is the reflection of reality? We'll see that in the book. We'll see that argued between Job's friends and him, right? Too. What?
I'm wondering if the phrase perish from the good land means perish period, meaning you're all gonna die, or you will be exiled to some terrible place?
Both.
You're gonna die here, or you're gonna just have to leave and
I
go
think-
to some bad place?
I think it may be even both, because in Deuteronomy especially, it talks about exile as a punishment. But I won't bring, like, there's more tons more verses in this book I can bring up, but yeah, it's both.
There's one piece here that strikes me as curious, but it's all, yes, it's cites the commandments and those who, obey the God's word, but it says, take care not to be lured away to serve other gods and bow to them, for the Lord's anger will flare up against you.
Yeah.
Doesn't say if you break this commandment or that commandment, or it's specifically goes towards that loyalty.
Yeah,
piece.
so idolatry is kind of the last step, right? Why would you not follow the commandments might be because you're idolatrous, right?
True, but
Yeah,
but to cite that as the binary, that's what's gonna do it for you.
right, yeah. Idolatry is the original sin, right? And so, like, you start with idolatry, everything else follows. I think the Bible sometimes says, when you turn to idolatry, then you become the murderer, then you sacrifice your children, then you cheat your business partner, then you things like that. You don't give loans to the poor, you don't. That's what it's kind of setting up.
Is it kind of symbolic in the sense that, I mean,
Yeah.
it's not like there was somebody over there with a golden calf and they were saying, hey, come over here.
Right.
It's more like, I get the sense that it's kind of like idolatry could take the form of worshiping money or something else.
Yeah, for sure, but it's both.
Mhm.
It is also the other people around who have idolatrous practices, who the Bible sets up as being immoral, right? The Canaanites sacrificed their children, right? The Canaanites, the Egyptians enslaved whole populations, the Babylonians and Egyptians believed, or the pharaohs, believed in power for power's sake. That all tied back to idolatry for the Torah, I think.
But the whole purpose of religion
Yes.
is to explain why things happen.
No, I would push back on that. I don't to say the whole purpose.
Not all right, but
So
the main purpose of religion.
Even saying the main purpose.
Your
So then why, but why
so
be
you
religious?
observe your
Because,
mitzvot.
so why be religious? Because I believe in evolution and the Big Bang, right? So like, I think, and I would say the Torah has no notion of religious, right? There's no word for religion so like, this is the way the Israelites lived because they had a relationship with this God.
Well, if you're an agriculturalist,
Yeah.
you're living in this desert.
Yeah.
And they tell you that if you worship Baal.
Yeah.
Your crops will grow. You better believe you're gonna turn to Baal and go, hey.
Yes, so Baal is very enticing because he controls the weather.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To me.
So this God is in competition
Yeah,
with Baal.
right. Yes, exactly. And that's why God is jealous. Right. And I want to talk about God's anger in a second. though.
Yeah, just so to me, much of Job maybe refutes that point,
Yeah,
but we'll
maybe,
see.
so we'll see.
But to me, one of the interesting, maybe we'll get to it, is if rain and the weather is such a blessing.
Yeah.
Why is there
Yeah.
rain in depopulated areas? Why is there
Right.
rain? So maybe we'll get to that too.
Why,
But
no, I don't, why is there rain? So if rain is such a blessing, why does it rain in the rainforest, but not rain in the, that's what.
So I think that's a
Kansas.
Job thing. I mean,
Yeah,
so.
Right,
so
right, well, if rain was,
You wanna
well, so
understand.
I think a biblical person would say, we might say, we live in the land of Israel where we rely on God, while other places, they don't rely on God.
But he makes it right, but
Yeah.
he's king of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. No, they knew of other climates.
And why it rains in places there's nobody.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's such a blessing. Anyway, yeah.
Rain is a blessing in the land of Israel. Rain is not a blessing in,
Seattle.
But-
in Oklahoma, in Kansas with tornadoes, that's not a blessing.
But I think using rain just as a metaphor,
Yeah.
blessings general.
It's probably,
No, but just in specific. Blessing is specific. To rain in the land of Israel is a blessing.
No, right, but why are there blessings?
Yeah,
Don't be so ethnocentric. I mean, there's the whole world.
Yeah,
You don't
right.
have to just come.
Yeah,
That's
right. So for the Israelites in the land of Israel, rain is the blessing.
And it's a blessing in the rainforest if you're an iguana or.
Yeah, right, yeah. But for the people who live in the rainforest.
Yeah.
Yeah, they depend
Yeah.
on that
Yeah.
vegetation.
Yeah,
So if the message, the overall message of the Torah is universal and supposed.
I don't know if the Torah was universal. I think it might have just been talking to the Israelites.
Because that
We
was. that was-
universal, yeah.
I mean, that was my question.
Yeah.
Why focus on?
They,
rain, which is-
the writers of the Torah had universal messages and very specific messages to the Israelites.
And to your point, Job's a little more universal in some of the other parts.
Job doesn't talk about the Israelites at all.
Right.
Doesn't talk about this
Yeah.
rain cycle for the land of Israel, right?
Talks about rain though.
Maybe,
I
but
think so, but yeah.
the land of Israel is not, it's not part of it. Right? Okay, good. So let's talk about this God's anger, okay? The hara af Adonai, God's nostrils will flare up. That's what it literally means. That's the word for anger. You know, people say, oh, the angry God of the Old Testament, right? Well, that's just an anti-Jewish statement that, you know, still pops up everywhere in Western culture because, you know, the New Testament God's just as angry. If you want to read the book of Revelations, it's angrier or maybe even more violent than things that happen in quote the Old Testament, right? You know, so it's a anti-Jewish statement that you can still find in the New York Times, right? And so but God's anger, what is that? Isn't God supposed to be loving? Well, aren't you loving parents also angry sometimes? And if you didn't get angry, doesn't that mean you don't care sometimes, right? Don't you need to have anger for there also to be love? Because if you don't get angry, that means you're indifferent and that's not love. So that's what I would argue, right?
Also, the conception of God changes over time in the Bible, particularly if you read it in the order events in the Jewish Bible. There's this book, God, a biography.
Right. Leslie and I were talking about it before you got here.
Yeah. You know, that shows how the evolution of
Yeah.
it's sort of like God grows up.
God steps away and allows humans to have the affairs more. And that's what we talked about when we're doing Book of Kings, where politics enters in when humans take over more, right? But God still gets angry, right?
But for parents, it's more frustration, so maybe God is frustrated that. they're not doing-
Frustration's a good word, yeah.
And then,
There's a difference between anger.
Right, okay, but like, so then I'll use now with parents, so like, if you didn't get angry about the way things are happening in America, you get angry because you love the country, right? That's the analogy I'll make, right?
well, and then the next step to that is, it's okay to be angry, but how you express it and how you direct it.
How do you direct it? Exactly.
Is, so in the case of God, is.
Yeah, but in case of God is like corrective punishment, right? And so like, you know, you still sent your kid to their room or whatever, right? You know, or took away
this
took away
early
Nintendo.
God smites.
Yeah, and his nostrils flare, so.
True. But did the people who wrote this and heard it, did they believe it was, you know, the causation and correlation problem?
Yeah.
Did they believe it was literal? Or I don't know.
Probably a spectrum of belief.
Spectrum. So let's look at
We're not gonna get to Job today.
we'll get to Joe this. But I said we probably weren't going to, but we have all year, but there's a lot to like talk about before we jump into
Sure.
Job.
Let's go. We have all year.
But turn to Exodus 34.
This the one with Paul Newman?
Starts on 188.
He's here all year, guys.
What verse?
I know the.
Just a second, I don't know.
Anger rabbit.
Which verse?
Let me find it. I think 34.
188.
It's alphabetical. No,
Page 189, start there.
I was close.
Yeah, but he didn't tell us what verse. We're waiting to hear the verse number.
Yes. Rehearse the verse. Reverse the verse.
Okay, good. So verse 5. So this is the famous passage in Exodus with God's what we call the Shalosh Esrei Midot, the 13 attributes of God. Okay, so we're talking about God's personality. This is a central part of Exodus, and this versions of this are repeated in in the Torah, and some of the prophets talk in this language too. This is God's essence, if you will, okay? Yeah. So,
The Lord came down in a cloud. He stood with them there and proclaimed the name of Lord.
right, Adonai, right, Yud He Vav He.
The Lord passed before him and proclaimed, the Lord, a God compassionate and gracious, slow to anger, abounding in kindness and faithfulness, extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, forgiving iniquity, transgression, and sin. Yet he does not remit all punishment, but visits the iniquity of parents upon children and children's children upon the 3rd and 4th generation.
Right, so on the holidays, on Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot, on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, you say these verses in the Torah service. Adonai, Adonai, El Rachum B'Chanun, Erech Apayim, B'Rav Chesed V'Emet, Noter Chesed V'Alafim, Nosei Avon V'Fesha, V'Chata'ah, V'Nakeh. There's what comes in the liturgy, but then you skip the part about the visiting punishment on the generations. If you don't want that to happen, you stop right there. But in the Bible,
Dropped in Jonah also.
right, Jonah doesn't have it, and other prophets, right? Other prophets have slightly different configurations of this, right? But again, we see, what is God mainly here?
Compassionate.
Compassionate, gracious, slow to anger, kind, faithful, right? And extending kindness to the 1,000th generation, right? Again, the proportion is way out of whack of punishment to love, right? And so that's what we're called to be, right? In Jewish tradition, when it says you walk in the ways of God, that's what it means, right? Okay.
If God is all those things,
Yeah.
and they all sound wonderful.
Yeah.
Why is God the excuse people use for mass destruction?
Right.
In the
Well,
name of
okay.
God.
Well, we will get because they don't read the Bible. Yeah. So-
Ignorance is always.
Yeah. So,
Top of the show.
and so again, when someone says, "Oh, the Old Testament God," I'm like, "Oh, what? Exodus 34? Is that what you mean?" Right? You read that too, like, okay. So, so that's what God, God proclaimed. This is God's words too. This is God saying about God's self, right? Okay. So now,
Wait, he said he described himself like that?
yeah.
Big ego.
The biggest.
No.
He's God.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's now, shall we start Job now?
Whoa.
Well, couple more words about Job. Sorry. So like Job, not studied a lot in traditional Jewish life. And there were some, classical commentaries about Job, but really, post-Holocaust, American Jews and others really took a liking to Job. And a bunch of books came out in the 20th century about Job. Robert Gordis was a American rabbi, Bible scholar. Solomon Freehoff was a Reformed rabbi, wrote a book about Job. I was over there getting coffee and I saw this on the shelf. There was a man, the drama of the Book of Job for the 20th century by some guy named Maxwell Silver. This came out in 1965. It was a famous play by, I'm forgetting his name right now. I think in the 60s, it was called JB. It was a retelling of the Book of Job.
Coen Brothers.
The Coen Brothers, but that was, like 15, 20 years ago, not right? Yeah. A Serious Man, which is one of my favorite movies. Yeah. Is that about the Book of Job? Hard to tell. We'll see. Yeah, kind of. And so everybody should see the Serious Man, best Coen Brothers movie after Big Lebowski. and Blood Simple's good too, but no, and Fargo. They're all good. Okay. Even Hail Caesar. I love Hail Caesar. Have you seen that? No. Okay. So the Book of Job became very important after so Christiane just said JB by Archibald MacLeish. Yeah. And struggling after the Holocaust of why righteous people suffer, right? In the early 80s, maybe many of you read it, Harold Kushner wrote, "When bad things happen to good people," it's not called "Why good things happen to," or "Bad things happen to good people," when bad things happen to good people. There's a whole chapter about the book of Job in that, right? That really popular in the early 80s, that really popularized the book of Job for people, that book. So, 1 million copies or something like that, right?
Yeah, I don't know if it's Greenberg specifically cites Job, but.
In his
but a lot of
post-Holocaust
it-
theology,
But his whole
yeah,
thing is this.
right. So there's a group, I mean, I know the American thinkers or the European, even though I guess Buber wrote about it a bit and others, but for American Jewish thinkers, the book of Job became very important in the 60s, especially, right? So people like Yitzhak Greenberg and others, right? Writing about Job specifically or in other ways, right? So,
Well, in light of October 7th, it's important that we reread it.
right, yeah, good. And so, questions, comments? Yeah, here.
When you go a little further down here, there's reference to.
Where are you? You're in Exodus again?
Exodus.
Yeah.
34 that we're just looking at. It goes into the covenant.
Yeah.
God, and that, in my mind,
Yeah.
is the basis of the relationship
Yeah.
between the Jewish people and God.
The covenant, exactly.
They've made a contract,
Yep,
okay?
Right.
That's what a covenant is, it's a
Yeah.
contract.
yep,
And then there's a breach of contract provision.
Yeah.
In here, you breach this is gonna be bad for you.
right,
And it's not only gonna be bad for you, but it could be bad for your successive generations. I will visit the sins of the fathers upon the children.
Right.
Okay, which is something that is said all the time here, that we will not do that,
right,
okay?
right,
But I do think that ultimately, in trying to discern, you could have the stories and parables, et cetera, that give you lessons about life, morality, et cetera. But I think fundamentally, this is where it's at. I mean, it's the 10 Commandments
right,
and being true to them,
right.
and
And so-
fulfilling the requirement.
And so I'm gonna complicate that though,
That's right, yeah.
because Job is not an Israelite. And there's no covenant there,
Yes, but.
except the covenant of Noah,
Yeah.
right? And so the book of Genesis lays out a covenant with Noah. That's the universal part of the Torah, is that everybody in the world has to act in a certain way, right? There's 7, I mean, how your tradition lays it out. The Israelites have a special covenant with God. Other people might have their own special covenants with God. Amos alludes to that, the prophet Amos. But in Jewish tradition, the whole world, their covenant with God includes no idolatry, no murder, no stealing, no blasphemy,
Bleeding blood.
right? No, like cruelty to animals is kind of right, or over cruelty to animals. We're all very cruel to animals. And
I think it's
no adultery and
Genesis 9.
right, but yeah, you have to. It
Yeah,
doesn't
pull
spell
it
out.
out,
You have to pull it. And I'm missing one. Murder, stealing, murder.
Law courts.
Law courts, there you go. You have to live in a place with a justice system. That's, if you follow those 7 rules, if you're not a Jew. If you follow those 7 rules, you're a righteous person. If you're a Jew, you have 600 something more, yeah. Okay, so now let's start with this non-Jew.
Wait, Rabbi,
Joe.
the commandments that we just read?
Yeah.
Are they the ones that are gonna be posted on the schools down?
Well,
there?
so that,
Are they gonna-
don't get me started. So that's the problem with the 10 Commandments. Jews see that this is only for Jews. Shabbat, only for Jews, right? Yeah, and so, yeah, we should post this. Well, the Chabad Rebbe who died, 20 years ago, he was very into the 7 Noahide commandments for everybody. He wanted those posted everywhere. And he wanted, he was very mad in the 60s when a lot of American Jews fought through the Supreme Court to stop prayer in school. The Chabad Rebbe was for prayer in school. And he didn't want Jews going to public schools, but he wanted everybody else to pray. Yeah, so, okay.
He wasn't wrong.
All right. Let us start with Job. I know it's 10 o'clock, but do we have 10 more minutes where we could just study a little bit? Okay. Okay. So we're starting with this, the story about Job, right? Which is not the bulk of the book, but this is what you might know about Job. Right? Okay. So what page? Job?
1657.
Okay, 1657.
That's when Columbus came up, right?
No, it was 1490.
All right, so
Once upon a time,
what's that?
once upon a time.
Yeah, once upon, exactly.
There was a man.
I mean, and the way the book starts makes it, you know, when you hear that in Hebrew, it means once, yeah, it makes it feel like we're just telling a story here. Yeah.
There was a man in the land of Uz named Job. That man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. 7 sons and 3 daughters were born to him. His possessions were 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, and 500 she-asses, and a very large household. That man was wealthier than anyone in the East. It was the custom of his sons to hold feasts, each on his set day in his own home. They would invite their 3 sisters to eat and drink with them. When a round of feast days was over, Job would send word to them to sanctify themselves, and rising early in the morning, he would make burnt offerings, one for each of them. For Job thought, perhaps my children have sinned and blasphemed God in their thoughts. This is what Job always used to do.
Job was so righteous that he was worried about his kids' sin and would, right? Yeah.
What's interesting here is the translation says a large household, but this one says a great abundance of slaves.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh.
right. So that is probably more accurate. So there's a lot of problems because because I don't own a lot of different translations for everybody. And actually there's another one. So you're reading Robert Alter. Gary has that too. And this came out recently too. Edward Greenstein's a scholar. I think he's at JT. No, he's in Israel. A new translation of Job. There's a lot of problem. I mean, the folktale is probably easy to translate, but in the poems, there's a lot of problems with translation because there's a lot of words. Job has the most, they're called in, I guess it's Greek or something called hapaxlegomenon, or words that only appear once in the Bible. Job has the most of those, right? And then also has a lot of, you know, other Aramaic in it. So we'll look at different translations and see,
Say that word again.
hapaxlegomenon.
Easy for you. It's right on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah. So let's see, what verse was that?
I thought that was an appetizer.
It was verse 3, I think.
Verse 3. So Edward Greenstein, okay, 3,000.
Hold on to that.
Yeah, he says in a very large servant tree, right?
God of,
Yeah, so it means,
But I just don't know how to begin the word.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard because slaves then didn't mean chattel slavery in the
Not
American
necessarily.
South.
right,
So
right,
it's like,
right,
yeah.
right. I mean, but it's also the same word, servants and slaves is the same word, and slavery was generally, if you lost the farm, you would, to pay off your debts, you would, you know, kind of like in Seinfeld when, you know, you had to become the butler, remember that? So that was slavery. Okay.
It's not time.
Okay, so this is what Job would always do, verse 6.
One day the divine beings presented themselves before the Lord, and the adversary came along with them.
Okay, so the adversary, Satan, the Satan, right? Okay.
Satan.
Right, so that's what we would say today, but Hasatan, it's not a proper name, it's not a proper name, it's a description. Hasatan, the adversary. This person in the divine council who was acting as the prosecutor, right?
There's a prosecutor.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
The Lord said to the adversary, where have you been? The adversary answered the Lord, I have been roaming all over the earth. The Lord said to the adversary, have you noticed my servant Job? There is no one like him on earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and shuns evil.
So here, God, and again, God is Yud Hey Vav Hey, like this is the God of Israel, but it doesn't say the God of Israel, but it uses God's proper name, right? But God loves Job. Look at this guy, right?
Exclamation point.
What's that?
Exclamation point.
Exclamation point. This is, you know, this is the A student. This is what we want everybody to be, right?
The adversary answered the Lord, does Job not have good reason to fear God? He answers him with a question.
Mhm.
Why it is you who have fenced him round, him and his household, and all that he has. You have blessed his efforts so that his possessions spread out in the land. But lay your hand upon all that he has, and he will surely blaspheme you to your face.
All right, so first I have to point out in Hebrew, verse 11 here, it says, Al panecha yivarechecha, yivarechecha, that on your face he will bless you. So it seems like it's the euphemism. They don't, the person who wrote it didn't want to say curse in the Hebrew, curse God, so he wrote bless God. So the person who wrote it is trying to be pious here, right? So, but it means curse, even though it says bless. But so what is Hasatan saying?
If God stops favoring him.
Yeah, it's easy to be a great guy when you're rich.
Yeah.
Right? That's what he's saying. It's easy to love God when you got everything going for you. Okay?
The Lord replied to the adversary, see, all that he has is in your power, only do not lay a hand on him. The adversary departed from the presence of the Lord. One day, as his sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the she-asses were grazing alongside them when Sabaeans attacked them and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you.
So these Sabians are some kind of, some kind of nomads or something, right? Yeah.
This one was still speaking when another came and said, God's fire fell from heaven, took hold of the sheep and the boys and burned them up. I alone have escaped to tell you. This one was still speaking when another came and said, a Chaldean formation of 3 columns made a raid on the camels and carried them off and put the boys to the sword. I alone have escaped to tell you.
So the Chaldeans are maybe the battle, like an army came and, not just,
Columns of.
yeah, like a huge attack, right? Okay.
This one was still speaking when another came and said, your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in the house of their eldest brother, when suddenly a mighty wind came from the wilderness. It struck the 4 corners of the house so that it collapsed upon the young people and they died. I alone have escaped to tell you.
Yeah, again, weather is not so great in Kansas, it could destroy you, right? Yeah.
Has the adversary apparently directly disobeyed what God told him?
No, go ahead, do it. Just don't hurt Job
Yeah.
physically. Yeah, see what happens. God and Hasatan. Yeah. God and Hasatan are experimenting here,
Game on.
playing around.
So there's 4 messengers that have come to Job.
Yeah, so, good. Saying like, because he's got kids all over and riches all over, and these are, people who work for him or coming in.
So that's not typical of Hebrew.
Oh, to have like a 3.
They have 3s. This
Yeah,
is
somebody.
4.
Yeah, I don't know if that, but yeah,
For the 4 corners of the earth.
yeah.
It's in the book of
The whole
Numbers.
premise of the bargain is disturbing.
The whole, yeah, exactly. Thank you. We'll talk about
We
it.
do
Keep
that
going.
to our children.
Yeah, let's keep going.
Then Job arose, tore his robe, cut off his hair, and threw himself on the ground and worshipped.
Right, Torah's road, right? Kriya, right?
He said, naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return there. The Lord has given, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord.
Right, which you say at a funeral.
For all that, Job did not sin, nor did he cast reproach on God.
He didn't curse God, right? So far, the bet, who's winning the bet?
God.
God.
That's what they say, you have the patience of Job.
Well, comes from the New Testament, right? It says that, yes. But when we get away from this story, this silly story, Job does not have patience. All right, but let's first talk. It's disturbing. Why is it disturbing?
Because he's agreeing to put harm's way,
Yeah.
actively
God-
harm his children.
God is acting like one of the Greek gods who just willy-nilly plays with humans. Yeah.
You know, it makes me think of that thing that bothered you, the comedian who had the parents all take
Oh,
the
yeah,
kids-
Jimmy Kimmel does that.
Right.
When at Halloween, when he tells the parents to take their kids candy
Oh, yeah.
and film them when they, and everybody thinks it's so funny.
Yeah.
I don't think it's so funny.
Well, so you could say that it's also a statement of how important humans are to God.
Yeah,
If God was indifferent to humans, he wouldn't even cast the bed.
right, if God was indifferent, right, so
That's-
God is active, okay, but active in a sadistic way right now, right?
This is
It
cool.
appears.
Cruel, right, well, we haven't gotten to chapter 2 yet, but but
Cavalier, he says, yeah, take
Okay.
everything you want, but.
but God thinks,
go.
God thinks Job's such a great guy, he doesn't care about
But if
possessions.
you did that to your children,
But the possessions are also children, right?
Is Job-
He's like, okay, Job loses his sheep and the house and all that stuff, okay, like, but God's allowing it to happen to the children too. Right, yeah,
is Job being the child of God,
right,
like to do all of those things to
Yeah.
him is.
yeah, okay,
Is
I mean-
it important that he tells him specifically, don't touch Job, just his children, his possessions?
yes, because it
Well,
sets up for chapter 2 when he allows them
Well,
to
but
touch
he
Job.
said, well, if you touch Job too much, the story will be over.
Right, you can't kill Job because then we wouldn't know what happens.
You wouldn't be a chapter 2.
Right.
Would be a chance.
Right.
There's no sense of why Job is so wealthy.
Because he's pious, that's what it seems to be from the first chapter.
From the first-
It seem to think that
God likes
he's
him.
wealthy because he's pious, right? But it doesn't say that explicitly.
He could be pious because he's wealthy.
Right, that's what Hasatan is saying.
Yeah.
He's only pious because he's wealthy, so it, which came first? Right, that's what we're supposed to think, oh, wait a minute, right?
I would say the only good thing I could say about God in the story so far is that he's establishing that there is such a thing as a righteous person.
He's, okay, good. Job is an example of a righteous person, God likes righteous people. But
Yeah, but
like,
it's the only thing I can say.
but God doesn't know, like, yeah, but like, are you righteous because you're wealthy?
Right.
Because you got an easy life,
And you've been fenced in and protected.
right? That's what Satan says, Hasatan says, yeah.
Why wouldn't God know? I mean,
Well, so
I know everything, man.
That's it.
right, well, I don't think that the Torah doesn't always say that God knows everything. Right,
Job is,
but again, this is a folk story, this is
Right.
not
This
this is not a philosophical investigation, although it has philosophical questions.
so this, as I understand, is a story that's characteristic of many stories from this
Perhaps.
setting in
Perhaps.
Babylonian.
Perhaps. I mean, think about it like, Grimm's fairy tales or Aesop's fables or things like that, right? This is a fairy tale right now. We're gonna tell a different story when we get to chapter 3, but right now, we're setting up this silly story, which maybe was a story that just everybody knew, right?
If this is.
Yeah.
An archetype.
Yeah.
Then the storyline through us.
Yeah.
And all is how are we supposed to respond?
Yeah.
To these
Well,
things?
Yeah.
what's the point of being righteous if all these horrible things are gonna happen to you anyway?
What's the point of being righteous for all this horrible thing? That's a good question.
Right?
But is being righteous about having a nice life? And I'll put it that way, Faith.
I mean, we always taught our children, you do what's right because it's right.
Yeah, right.
It's not
That's
a
it.
question of
Exactly.
reward or.
Right. So what do we know? Like, we're gonna find out, does Job, I mean, so far, that's what Job thinks too. Because he's lost all his rewards. And he's still being a righteous person, right?
To me, it's less a question of why be righteous if bad things will still happen, but more like why be righteous if being righteous causes bad things to happen.
If being
Those are
righteous.
different, those are
Yeah.
different things.
Right.
But I wanted
Yeah.
to. Is there any indication, I'm not seeing it here, but do we know his backstory?
No.
Was he raised wealthy? Did
Nope.
he like?
Once upon a time, there was a guy who was rich.
And we don't know, we don't know.
The only backstory we know is that Ezekiel knew about a guy named Job.
The medical background.
We didn't know, we didn't know Abraham's backstory either.
Oh, but the point is, there's no such thing as a self-made man.
Right. Yeah, the Bible would never
Right.
think of a self-made.
Maybe there's no such thing. I mean,
And
he
you
was-
would
You inherited.
You'd said previously when they used the term blessed, it was because they didn't want to use the word curse.
Curse God, when it comes to God.
And at this very next to last sentence,
Mhm.
are we sure he didn't mean that he cursed God?
No, he didn't give tefillah to God. He didn't pray to God. It says here. Yeah. But that's what it means. I mean, that's what it's always meant in tradition, but it's saying that Job, because chapter 2 would make sense. If he curses God here, there wouldn't need to be a chapter 2. That would,
Right.
it would be over, the story would be over, right?
Can't help thinking of a meme I saw yesterday. It was a picture of a African woman on a bicycle with one flat tire, and she's got 3 kids, one of them, and carrying all this stuff, and underneath it said, if hard work and persistence were what it takes to be successful, then every African woman should be a multimillionaire.
Yeah, right. So most of human life until, the late 19th century, and only in the West, or in pockets in the world, was very hard. And people were still good and right. Most people were still good and righteous and persistent and had kids and things like that, Yeah. And so, your grandparents and great grandparents in the shtetl, I mean, for most of you in the shtetl in Europe, lived in poverty. And that's why most people left Eastern Europe. Was not, they heard about pogroms in other towns, but pogroms weren't everywhere. It was mainly about the poverty, right? And they still had families and still lived righteous lives. I mean, not everybody, some people were scoundrels. And yet, did they say that God was punishing them? I don't know. Maybe some people did. Maybe they didn't ask that question.
So to me, it sounds like we're setting up a situation where if you're not tested, you really can't be deemed to be righteous.
We'll talk about tests. Does God test us? It says in Genesis, God tested Abraham, right? The 10 trials of Abraham in Jewish tradition, right? So we'll see. Is God just so God is testing Job? Is the tests that we get from God, is that what makes us righteous? I don't know, right? So we'll talk about that.
On a personal level, I'm sort of thinking if you don't feel pain, you don't know to really feel well.
Right, yeah. God forbid any of us suffer, but there's always some kind of hardship.
There's always some kind of non-righteousness. I
And
think
there's
that,
always some kind of non-right, yeah,
I mean, so I think
nobody
that's
is
what
perfect,
Job-
nobody is perfect. Our folk story makes Job be perfect.
for now,
Yeah,
I would say, but yeah.
right, but I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, did I whet your appetite enough for the book of Job?
Oh, yeah.
It's gonna be we'll read chapter 2 next week. Maybe we'll get into the poems, but once we get to the poems, it's a very different story. Okay? And it's not what you thought, maybe not what you thought Job would be about. So, questions, comments?
Just musically.
Yeah.
The Song of Job by the band C Train.
I don't know, it's a good list.
Look for that on Spotify or whatever.
Song of Job by the band C Train.
Right, goes back to 70s.
Okay, great.
C-Train was, I know the band, but I can't.
You do.
Okay.
Thank you for an interesting
So-
introduction.
Well, my pleasure. And so actually, I'll bring next week a professor of mine from Cincinnati recently, a couple years ago. A huge book came out, or all these essays about the book of Job throughout Jewish thinking, and it's endlessly interesting. So I'm looking forward to this with you. Hopefully, we won't get I'm gonna tell you, it's gonna be hard as we go through, but we can do it. Okay, so let's
You can kill it.
yeah. Let us give thanks for our food.
Will help us do it.
Yeah. Wait, I'm gonna stop the recording.